I'm so glad you're,
Yeah.
at MD Anderson, you're getting it all taken care of. You've got the isatuximab waiting. So it's a great segue into dealing with this like continuous treatment, and I think I'm talking about the mental and the emotional and the spiritual part of this for you. Um, First, how have you been able to manage it? And if you have any sort of guidance to other people?
Well, faith is very important to me for sure, and there's no way I could get through this without knowing that God definitely does have a plan. And I have been able to see blessings through this and stuff. And you do live your life a little bit differently, and make sure that you focus on having some really fun times, fun trips with the kids when you can, and things like that. And it is difficult for sure, though, to keep going through and finding the new treatments. But then you have to realize there's only one alternative, and that's that there wasn't a new treatment, or that you got worse and couldn't have a treatment. So, it's multiple myeloma's research is amazing right now, all the different things they're finding. So, the fact that there's been this many treatments that I could try is actually a blessing. So, but it is difficult to always be switching. So
I want to talk about the fact that there's so much treatment, and the fact that you're having to do it while being in an area that doesn't have like a huge MD Anderson is a flight for you, or a long drive. And so driving 90 miles one way for local chemo, 180 miles for checkups. Can you talk about how that impacts your life? And again, if you have any advice for other people who are in the same shoes.
Yeah. Well, it meant that I really needed to accept that help from people that were willing to, drive me, lots of family, lots of friends, because lots of times after the chemo, I didn't feel well enough to drive. Lots of times, my blood pressure had dropped or something. So it did mean getting rides and stuff. And sometimes, those chemos were like twice a week, every week with a week off. So then that was a lot of driving. I have been able to have some treatments at the hospital right in our town, but they have just a very small chemotherapy setup. And so it usually depends on whether it's a therapy that my oncologists feel like I can have in a small town that, they'll be able to handle if there's a side effect. So like the new one that I'll be having, they want me to do it in Billings, Montana, which is 180 miles away. So, yeah.
I like that. Accept help and just accept it. And just a couple more, and then I know we've taken up a lot of your time already, but it's just so great to hear from you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, the new treatments part of it, before we get too far. What is just the overall feeling? You talked about it a little bit. The landscape of treatments is shifting so much, which is great. And you've benefited from being, oh, there's that one coming up, and so what are your thoughts about that? And for anyone who's a little bit nervous, who's starting out at the beginning of their myeloma experience?
Kind of taking one day at a time. I know that that's sort of a simplistic saying, but boy, it is true, because if you start focusing too much on, well, what about 4 months from now when that one doesn't work anymore? Or what about that PET scan that's coming up, it won't work. You kind of have to really focus on what you've got to do just that day, and what fun maybe you can have too, and how you can make that a quality day, so it's better not to look too long term, because with multiple myeloma, it's probably going to change. So you're probably not going to be able to make a plan out there and say, I'm going to be doing this, because at any minute, something can happen, and then you're going to need a different therapy. But doing those follow-ups when they're scheduled, like I think sometimes people put off their PET scans, or they don't get to the doctor quite as soon as they should have. And I think it's really important to do things in a timely manner, because they can help you if you're catching it every time that's coming back, catching it right off. You know.
It's a great point. And then with the, I just, because you have so much experience with the clinical trials, I know we could probably talk for hours about that, but if you had to just say, you know, any sort of advice for people who are looking to join a clinical trial, because it takes a lot of time.
It does, but you know, actually talking to your local oncologist might help. They might not, they might know. And I think the website that I went to was clinicaltrials.gov, and you can pull up any trial in the whole US, or you can just pick, you know, Seattle area or something like that, and you can pick your cancer and narrow it down. And then just being brave enough to like call the numbers or submit something online. And there is, of course, a lot of background information that they're going to want. And, you know, you send them labs and different scans and all that. But really, your oncologist, too, will end up sending the records. So it's not all on you. And like when I went through a trial, there was someone assigned to me, like a patient care coordinator. And she called me almost daily and would be like, this is where we're at. This is what we need. So like the trial, it was a lot, but you really have a whole team that's looking out for you. It is so different than when you're going to like a regular facility, you know, for just chemotherapy, because you're part of a trial. You're kind of, it's a big deal. So there's 6 or 8 people that are just assigned to you, and, you know, a team of doctors that care what happens every day. So I just say jump in with both feet, because for me, the trials what bought me time and gave my body just a little bit of a break from the routine of chemo, and maybe even mentally too, gave me for sure that new hope, you know. And I got to see those tumors just be zapped away, even though they did come back. But the visual of watching them go away, and knowing too that then that was going to help, like shortly after I did the second CAR T cell trial, or not the BCMA, but some form of CAR T cell was approved by the FDA for multiple myeloma. So, you know, I like to hope that I had just a little piece in that somewhere down the line, someone else will be able to have a CAR T cell and it not be, you know, they're not going to have to jump through all the hoops. And it's an easier process than a stem cell transplant, for instance. And so it could just mean, you know, a week or so in the hospital, if that, down the road.
Right. And I'm so happy you brought that up. You know, it's the beauty of the clinical trials is it could help yourself a lot, but it may, well, it will help other people, you know, in this research. Really quickly, I know this will be really helpful for people, Connie, is it did take months of phone calls and meetings to be able to finally get qualified. And I just want people to understand, you know, everyone has different experiences, but I've heard from others that it's almost, again, like a full-time job. So just to expect that, maybe have some help. And that once you qualified, you did get help with travel expenses. And that's because there was so much follow-up. Can you just describe that?
Yeah, and of course it's a government funded through the National Institute of Health. So all of the, you know, the whole healthcare, all of the healthcare is covered by the government. So all of your scans and all of that, none of that is out of pocket. But then also, and it also depends on your income and different things. But like my flight was covered, but like, even though I needed a caregiver, my caregivers wasn't. But there was even a stipend for like hotels and food. And then it varied from one trial to the other. But really, because you had monthly follow-ups for the first 6 months that you had to go and be there almost a week to do all the, you know, like every month you had to have a bone marrow biopsy, for instance. Anyone who's had those, that's a lot to go through, you know. And their tests were extensive, you know. And so, but hey, it was all covered and for scientific research. So it was rather interesting too.
My thank you for sharing that, because it's very unique insight. You've been through too. The last question I have for you is on self-advocacy. I just figure let's end on an empowering note here. Connie, you mentioned that because you had a career in healthcare, you, for instance, knew your prescriptions by memory and their purpose, interpreting labs. There are different ways of being proactive. So that's one example, but any message to people out there who are reading and listening to this on how they can advocate for themselves and how important it is.
I think it's really important to be willing to like call up and hopefully know the nurse's name or the main contact at your oncologist's office and be able to call them when you're not feeling well, because maybe that stomach ache is something more. Maybe that leg pain is that you're low on potassium. And sometimes when you go ahead and make that call, they'll order labs or something and find out what's going on. And then, things like with me, everyone has some personal thing that they're struggling with. I always struggled with the low white counts, and the labs would never show something called absolute neutrophil count, but I learned how to calculate it myself with what was given. And so then I could say my absolute neutrophil count is low. Will you be getting back to me today about taking Neupogen? And I got to the point with like that I gave myself shots of Neupogen, but the patient advocacy comes in all forms, and it really is the communication with your doctor, the nurses, everyone along the way, using the patient portal. Like most facilities now, you can just send them a quick email through the patient portal and you can look at your labs. And I think it's important to know what's in your charts better than they know it. Know the names of your chemos, know the prescriptions, what you're on them for, not just the names of them. Why do you take that one? So
Thank you so much, Connie. Any last thing you want to say to people?
Oh, thanks for letting me be on, Stephanie. And, other people going through this, it really, they've made leaps and bounds with multiple myeloma with research, and it is not curable, but it's sure you can still live a good life.
And I think you're going to give people so much hope and inspiration on that note. Thank you so much, Connie. And for everyone who wants to hear Connie's entire story here, just head to thepatientstory.com where you'll find human answers to your cancer questions. Thank you.